Hello everyone, Mariko Berg, residential realtor with the Bridgewell Real Estate Group, and welcome back to the Bridgewell Group YouTube channel where I talk about all things real estate, particularly in my market, which is the Greater Vancouver and Fraser Valley markets of British Columbia, Canada. And in today's video, I am going to be talking about what is the difference between market value and BC assessment. Particularly, should you rely on BC assessment to help you determine what you're going to buy or sell a property for, how much weight you should put on that. And spoiler alert, we don't typically like to put that much weight on it or have our clients put too much weight on it. So I'm going to go through the reasons why we don't necessarily recommend you to rely too much on BC assessment so that ultimately you can make an educated decision for what you want to do moving forward. So let's just get into it. So what is market value versus assessed value? These are both ways that your property value are referenced, but the methods and the timing of them are very different and can therefore equal very different numbers for the same property. I've definitely seen it before where BC assessment does actually match my market evaluation range, but I've also seen it more commonly than not very, very different numbers, both high and low. So I think that there is definite value to you getting a proper market evaluation by a realtor if you are thinking about listing or buying a property, just to confirm what your true market value is based on the current market conditions and timing. So what are some of these key differences that I'm talking about? When we are looking at determining what market value is versus assessed value, the key differences are that with market value, you are typically having a realtor come through, regardless of whether it's on the buy or the sell side, and looking at recent sold and active properties to help determine a market value range. And ultimately, when you have an accepted offer, regardless of what side you're on, that agreement between that buyer and seller and that successful sale is a true indication of what market value actually is. Because really, market value is just what the amount is that two people come together and decide this property is worth and transact on. That's what market value is. On the assessed value side of things, this is essentially correlating to BC assessment. So it's an assessor that works for the government entity and comes through and does their own analysis to determine what this dollar value is. And it's a specific number, not necessarily a range like you would maybe get with a realtor, but again, eventually a specific number with that transaction. Another key difference between the two of these is that when you are dealing with final market value, obviously the realtor is coming through in person to determine layout, condition, all of those kind of things. And of course, the buyer is going to be coming through and taking those factors into consideration as well. Wherein as assessed value situation, you don't have BC assessment, person coming through and looking at every single property in all of BC and considering those kind of things in person. Market value is also done in real time, so that market evaluation is happening when you're listing that property, when a transaction is occurring. That is literally like real time, recent comparable sales. Whereas assessed value is always the previous July 1st of every year. So right now it's November 2025. All the assessed values are going to be based on July 1st of 2025. There's a lot of difference between that time period. So just keep in mind that assessed value is always based on that summer date. Finally, market value, the purpose of this is going to be for a real estate transaction, whereas assessed value, primarily the purpose is going to be for tax purposes. So your property taxes are, for example, based on your assessed value, and that's why this number is very important for that purpose. So now that you understand the difference between market value and BC assessed value, I think it's also really important to understand some of the key reasons why realtors don't typically use BC assessment as the main dictator of what market value is, and why I don't recommend that for my clients. The number one reason is definitely timing. And so again, if you look back to this board, you'll see that the assessed value is based on the previous July 1st. So for example, right now it is November 2025, which means the BC assessed value is going to be based on July 1st, 2025. That's a decent amount of time ago. Similarly, if you're looking in January or February of 2025, it's going to be based on 2024 numbers, July 2024 numbers. So every new sale essentially dictates a new market value. The market is constantly changing, it's constantly moving. And so you really want something as recent as possible in order to properly determine what your market value is. And so for me, it's like I want something like yesterday or within the week, or at least within similar market conditions. Usually I'm not looking past 90 days unless I'm desperate and the market's really slow, there's not a lot of sales. And I'm definitely putting more weight on sales because that's what's actually moving, that's a success story, versus active properties where someone could just list wherever they want to, right? So that's really what we're looking for, and that's why market value is always going to be the better determinant, or a realtor assessment is always going to be a better determinant of market value, because we are pulling those recent and comparable sales, and we're not basing it off of something that is very likely outdated. The second reason why I don't typically rely on BC assessment as a sole measure for market value is because it doesn't take into consideration the current market conditions. As I said before, there's a lot that can change from when that assessed value happens to what your actual purchase or sale timeline is. The market could be really hot. The market could be really cold. We could be in a more balanced market. This is definitely something that you need to take into consideration. Is supply really high, and is that impacting the pricing? Is supply really low and everything is moving super quickly and the market's changing day by day, right? This is definitely something that you have to take into consideration when you're offering on a property. And again, that's why that real time is very important versus based on a previous date, because the market is always changing. You really have to take into consideration what kind of market you are currently in and what that property is competing with in terms of active comparables. So the third reason why I wouldn't solely rely on BC assessment is because they don't see those properties in person. And there's a number of reasons why this is important. One of the main reasons I would say is to verify that the information is actually correct. I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a listing appointment and cross-referenced something with BC assessment, and maybe there's a difference in the number of bathrooms, bedrooms, the square footage, there's a discrepancy. Those kind of things are really important to verify, and obviously are key indicators of what you are going to offer based on market value, or what you think market value is. Another one is obviously you don't get a feel for the condition of the property. You know, you can't tell if someone has been smoking in there and it reeks of smoke and you completely need to redo all the paint. You can't get a feel for if it's a tenanted property versus an owner-occupied property and what the condition could mean based on that. And you certainly can't get a feel for what the actual condition of the property is. Is it super beat up? Is it well taken care of? Is it renovated? A lot of the times the renovations that are done don't require permits, and so it might not be reported, and that very well could not be factored into the assessed value. And so these are all very, very important parts of what you assess or determine a property's value at that definitely need to be taken into consideration. Last but not least, I think that layouts and floor plans are also very important. And so very similar to probably how you look online, if you don't see a floor plan, you want to go and see the property in person so you can get a feel for how it actually feels. Does it feel spacious? Does it feel cramped? That's another key factor why having that in-person aspect of determining market value is always going to be beneficial. And again, because you get that when you are actually dealing with market value, whether it be a realtor coming by to list your property and doing that market evaluation in person, or of course a buyer coming through, a showing or an open house to determine if they like that property, that in-person portion of things is very important to determine true market value. Last but not least, the fourth reason is because I absolutely think that there is an emotional and also a subjective side to real estate. So a very common question is, why is the seller selling? Why do we ask that? It's because we want to understand motivation, right? Or the seller might be like, why is this buyer selling? Are they motivated? Are they going to remove subjects? Like, have they had their landlord give notice and they need to move? Have they sold their place and they need to move? This is a consideration for people to determine how much they're going to be offering. Are they more motivated or are they less motivated? And I don't care, I can move in a year. That can bring very different responses in terms of what they offer and what they might be willing to go to in terms of market value for a particular property. And then of course, there's the subjective side of real estate, right? So a view is a perfect example. Maybe a view is like a non-negotiable for you and that's worth $100,000. So that's $1 million view, right? But for me, I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't care about a view at all. That's not something that I'm willing to pay more money for. That is an example of subjective value, or a second parking stall, or a second storage locker, or EV parking. There are different value points that someone might place on that based on how important it is to them. And so that is definitely not something that you're able to take into consideration from an assessed value perspective, but from a market value perspective, where maybe you're dealing with multiple offers, or you're dealing with different emotions, particularly in residential real estate, that's absolutely something that gets factored in and that you have to consider in terms of what that true market value ends up being when that real estate transaction occurs. So I hope that this video was helpful in determining how much weight you put on BC assessment moving forward when you're buying or selling. Again, my name is Mariko Berg and I'm a residential realtor with the Bridgewell Real Estate Group. And if you are looking for a team to help you buy or sell in the Greater Vancouver or Fraser Valley areas, definitely feel free to reach out to us. While we don't put as much weight on BC assessment, it's definitely something that we will consider as an alternative option. But again, we're usually putting more weight on those recent sales, then active properties, and then BC assessment to really gain that understanding of what true market value is. And we would absolutely love to help you figure that out for yourself as well. So make sure to like this video if you did enjoy it, subscribe for future videos, and stay tuned for more. Thanks so much, guys, and have a great day.